Coming up now. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show here on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you. Let's talk about the Middle East. Let's talk about Antony Blinken's press conference, his last press conference as Secretary of State. And boy, it was exciting. Two of our most iconic independent reporters were thrown out. We talked to one of them this morning, Sam Husseini and Max Blumenthal. What is going on? What's going on with this deal? Is it a deal or no deal? What's really going? What's the backstory here? What about Ukraine? I mean, what are we going to do? I mean, we saw President Biden give his valedictory address, if you will, and he said, "Look, we've been working on this ceasefire deal since May, and yet it seems that." When President-elect Trump said, look, enough already, we got some movement. But we don't know what's really going on. The deal was on, then it was off, and now it might be back on. But what's really the point? Because you've got members of the Netanyahu cabinet who say that, well, we want to have a ceasefire, but we really do want to continue with the war after we get these hostages home. Then we have something called the Gaza envelope, which is where the October 7th attacks took place. The Gaza envelope we found out from Ariel Gold, who has family in Israel. The Gaza envelope is the border between Gaza and Israel. And apparently this group of Israelis are not beloved by many Israelis, Bryce Green, because they're very, very progressive. You know, they get the aid in. They build relationships with the Palestinians. And wow, it's just such a tangled web that has been woven. So I didn't say woven, I said woven. I've never seen it gets more and more complex by the day. Just more and more complex by the day. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about it. Shalom, Robert. Mike, how you doing? Everybody, like and share. Please like and share. That helps with the algorithm. Like and share. I'm on Blue Sky at santitajackson.bsky.social. santitajackson.bsky.social. And hey, easy peasy, also known as Paula Garcini. That's right, my girl. How you doing? And I'm on the Santita Jackson and Friends page on Facebook. We're on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Join us over there, everybody. I'm still on X at Santita J. I will not be on TikTok in a minute. I think I will be on Red Note, and I will let you know about that too. Well, one monkey don't stop no show. They can shut that down, but I will not be on TikTok as it will be reconfigured. I'm going to go someplace else. So let's talk about this, and let's talk about this with this brilliant writer who's been with us. He's part of the family here, getting this PhD right now, but he's taking a break in his studies to go over all of these tremendous international issues with us. Of course, we were so proud last year when you were called to speak to the United Nations to explain Ukraine. That was a wonderful honor, but I couldn't think of anyone more capable of doing that. But let's start with the Middle East today, and this deal, or is it no deal? What is the deal? What's going on as you can best discern, Bryce Green, from fairness and accuracy in reporting? And we want you to be fair. We want you to be accurate in your reporting. Help us understand what we're looking at.
Absolutely. So I do think that there is a deal, right? There's been many times in the past year, past 15 months, in which there's been reports about a deal being close to being reached, but then one side, usually almost certainly the Israeli side, would then say, no, a deal has not been reached. And if you follow the Israeli press, they've reported consistently that every time it is because Netanyahu has added an extra condition that he knows will sabotage the deal. But this time, it seems that we have gotten far enough that the deal has been agreed to by both sides, and both sides are talking to the press and saying, yes, we're going to go forward with this deal. But once again, we've hit a snag. Netanyahu says that because of Hamas doing last minute additions, he's delaying the certification of the deal in the Israeli cabinet. Any deal that is going to go through has to be ratified by the Israeli cabinet, and Netanyahu has said that he's going to delay this vote. Now, the U.S. still assures us, the U.S. Officials speaking to the press have assured us that the deal is still in motion and that it's planned to go in effect on Sunday as planned. But this turbulence inside the Israeli government itself is troubling, but it is not a deal breaker. It is not a nail in the coffin. Unfortunately, until the deal is finalized and until the deal goes into effect, Palestinians are continuing to be murdered by Israel. Dozens were reported just hours after the deal was publicly released to the public, was publicly acknowledged. And of course, today we're seeing more strikes. Reporters in Gaza are reporting this. But this is happening alongside the celebrations that are happening, not just in Gaza, but all around the world, that these killing fields are about to come to an end. Now, for people who have studied this conflict, we understand that this didn't start on October 7th, and it's not going to end with whatever deal ends this phase of the war. Before October 7th, the Palestinian people, especially the people in Gaza, were living in intolerable conditions. They were living in an area that was hermetically sealed by the Israeli government. They controlled land, sea, and air. They couldn't go far off of their coast to go fish without being shot down by Israelis. They couldn't import materials to build their infrastructure, build their own airports, and they certainly couldn't leave the Strip without explicit permission from their Israeli occupiers. And of course, the area of Gaza is, even before October 7th, was one of the world's leading humanitarian crises. With 91% of the water being undrinkable, the UN actually declared years ago, back in 2017, that the Gaza Strip would be unlivable by 2020. Well, here we are 5 years later, and the conditions have only dramatically worsened. So no matter what happens with respect to this ceasefire deal, the Palestinian cause should not fall from the forefront of our minds and the forefront of our coverage, because America still maintains a system of apartheid in the West Bank and in Gaza and within Israel proper, and Americans are still responsible for what happens to the Palestinian people. It would be the biggest disappointment if American audiences, all these activists, all these reporters, were to see this ceasefire deal and then turn their gaze away from the still continuing apartheid system that Israel has enacted around Gaza and the West Bank. Now, we still have reason to be glad, right? The fact that this phase of the war is done is important. But the most important thing now, of course, in addition to ending Israeli apartheid and continuing the Palestinian cause, is accountability. We've seen so much over this last year that it might be our instinct to put it behind us, to put all the lies, all the justifications, all the military support, all of these statements denying the genocide. We might be tempted to put all of that behind us, but we do that at our own peril. And, it is a natural instinct. Obama came into office on the backs of the anti-Bush backlash. All these people who said that Bush needed to be criminally prosecuted, and Cheney and his whole administration need to be criminally prosecuted for the crimes of that they committed while they were in office, the death and destruction that they presided over. But in the interest of stability and unity, the Obama administration decided not to do any of that. The people who were torturing people in black sites around the world, they got off. The people who launched illegal wars of aggression, they got off. And of course, they metastasize into our political system, where those crimes are hardly thought of as crimes anymore. And the image of George W. Bush has been rehabilitated. He's just a nice old guy who paints, eccentric pictures. But he's a true war criminal, probably the biggest war criminal of the 21st century.
Wait a minute. Why would you say that?
Well, the wars of Afghanistan and Iraq were both based on lies. And if you look at the Cost of War project from Brown University, they've calculated that the wars that were launched in the wake of the global war on terror have claimed well over 4 million lives and have caused a migrant crisis, a refugee crisis on the scale of World War II, of post World War II. That's a major crime. And that's only the most glaring example of Bush's crimes, to say nothing of his flaunting of the rule of law, to say nothing of him stealing the election in 2000. But none of these things are adjudicated within our lawless system. And my worry is that the crimes of the Netanyahu government and the crimes of the Biden administration for supporting them will similarly go unadjudicated and fall into the memory hole. And we already see right now the image of Joe Biden as, the nice grandpa who helped America out of an economic catastrophe situation. We already see that image trying to be pushed by certain members of the press. We've seen books by people like Bob Woodward who are trying to portray Biden as a peacemaker, as someone who did all he could to keep us out of conflict and to prevent the wars that he fueled, to prevent those from spreading. This image of Joe Biden, it seems tailor-made to be a way to whitewash away the crimes of his administration. The crimes and the horrible policies, the disastrous policies that have left Americans and the rest of the world a lot worse off. If we do that now with Netanyahu, with Biden, with Matt Miller, with Anthony Blinken, with all of the cast of characters who have enabled this genocide to continue, well, then we're setting the stage for more lawlessness in the American political system and more death and destruction in the future.
Well, do you see us turning away from that with Trump? I mean, what do you make of his, certainly he's had influence upon this deal, if you will, quote unquote. And he has taken credit for it, as President Biden took credit for it during his valedictory address. He said, we've been working on this since May, but magically, interestingly, should I say, well, no pun intended, no joke, it seems that when, I don't know if it was staged or I don't know if it was sincere, but certainly publicly, Donald Trump said, look, enough already. Benjamin Netanyahu, enough. Let's end this. Or at least we have to have the ceasefire now, period. Let's work this out. Where do you see Trump in all of this? And where do you see him possibly going with this?
So I think that there's two main trends that have led to the end of this war. One is that despite all the rhetoric about dismantling Hamas, about removing Hamas from the Strip, and all this rhetoric from the far right in Israel about reoccupying Gaza and completely removing the Palestinians from the area, the Israeli military was well aware that they would not be able to accomplish this. In fact, if you go back and look at the reporting from October 2023, November, December, the early days of this genocide, the Israeli generals were talking to the Israeli press and saying that the goals that Netanyahu is publicly stating are impossible. We cannot remove Hamas from the Strip. In fact, every time we kill them, two more take their place. And of course, the more we bomb Gaza, the more we create the conditions of rubble and debris and destroyed cities. That's harder to occupy and fight in than an intact city. They were well aware of this from the start. And so the fact that the fact that they were never going to achieve their goals meant that this war had to end some other way. And you also have the fact that Israel was suffering a great deal economically as a result of this war. There was a great article from Mondo Weiss back in June that was detailing all the economic ways that Israel is suffering from this war. They had a massive population drain after the days of October 7th that continued to accelerate. Many people who felt that Israel was their, colonial safe haven. I heard it compared to Tuscany. were awoken to the reality that the cost of their comfort was blood, and many of them didn't want to confront that, and they left. The tech sector is being drained as young professionals are leaving the society. The international pressure has prevented a lot of deals from being made with Israeli corporations. Some countries have embargoed their energy exports to Israel. Colombia, for example, barred coal from going to Israel. If they're not able to get their energy in a cheap and timely fashion, well, then their entire industry can't be supported by that. And of course, you just have the a public relations fiasco. Israel, it certainly wants to be a part of the world community, but it wants to be an exceptional member, much like the United States is. But you can only do so much of that before people around the world start to cut you off, start to say, no more, you can't have this. And so, for a lot of reasons, and of course, you also have the hostages' families inside of Israel who have been demanding an end to this war and a deal, and they've been protesting the government for quite some time. You don't really hear about it in the American press. In bits and pieces, you do, but the Israeli hostages' families have been livid at the Netanyahu government because they correctly perceive the government as stalling on a deal, as deliberately prolonging this war. And so they represent a massive constituency within Israel that's not having any of this. And I think that when you take all of that into account, Israel needed to end this war eventually without achieving its stated war aims. And so that's one reason that Israel ended this war. And then you have the Trump of it all. Trump has long been one of Israel's staunchest supporters. His administration boasted of moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, legitimized the Golan Heights occupation that was not recognized by the international community, but it was recognized by Trump. And of course, Jared Kushner has Trump's son-in-law has close ties to Israel and deep ties with the Israeli establishment. And each of these,
and with Netanyahu, he used to sleep in his bedroom when he visited New Jersey.
exactly. I mean, these connections aren't just institutional; they're very personal.
Yeah.
And on a personal level, Israel feels that Trump is their man. But Trump has made it clear since at least October, likely long before that, that he did not want to inherit this unpopular war, that he did not want to be blamed for the carnage in Gaza. He did not want to be the target of these protesters, the target of all these anti-war working class people who understood that America was sending billions and billions of dollars to the Middle East, but not to them. He didn't want to be the target of all that. And so you can go back and look at the reporting that says that Trump explicitly told Netanyahu that he wanted this war over by the time that he is inaugurated. This was again echoed by Lindsey Graham a few weeks later. It was explicitly stated. And the fact that Israel and Trump are so close indicates that this was a factor in their calculus. And we have evidence of this directly from Israelis themselves. The Lebanon ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah, the one that Israel has continuously violated, literally thousands of times, but the ceasefire still nominally holds. But that ceasefire, Israeli officials told places like the Washington Post and the Israeli press that it was a gift to Trump, that it was a gift to ensure that, again, Trump did not inherit these hugely unpopular wars. So you have an opportunity for Israel to give another major gift to Trump while also enhancing the position of their major ally in the White House. And we also know that Trump accepted $100 million from Miriam Adelson. Miriam Adelson is the widow of Sheldon Adelson, one of the major figures of the Israeli and pro-apartheid lobby in America. Mm-hmm. And it was reported at the time that the strings attached to this deal was that Trump would continue to support Israel, but specifically its annexation of the West Bank. Mm-hmm. So if you give Trump this seeming victory by ending the war as he's going into office and saying that it's because Trump is such a shrewd deal maker, If you end the war that way, you get to kill two birds with one stone. You get to end this war that they knew that they were never going to achieve their stated goals, but you also enhance the position of an ally, setting the stage for achieving other goals, like annexing the West Bank, and like, as we're seeing with this deal, like starting up low-level fighting in Gaza, though not technically breaking this, uh, on paper ceasefire. So both of those trends, I think, explain why Israel ended the war when it did. Because it's not like Hamas didn't offer these deals beforehand, right? I mean, go back as far as October 9th, 2023, which seems like such a long time ago. Go back as far as that. Hamas offered to end the fighting. Hamas offered to return all of the civilian hostages in exchange for Israel not beginning their ground invasion. Israel rejected it because even though they knew going in that they wouldn't be able to fully dislodge Hamas, they wanted to punish the civilian population, to punish, humiliate, and terrorize the civilian population. I mean, this is what the UN found that Israel's goals were in 2008. And here we see a hundredfold, thousandfold increase in the violence that we saw in 2008-09. And so if Israel is going in then and rejecting all of the ceasefire deals, Biden acknowledged that the ceasefire that they just agreed to was on the table explicitly in May of 2024. So why did Israel do this now? Well, like I said, it's for those two reasons. They know they couldn't end the war, and they also saw an opportunity to end it, or they know they couldn't complete their war objectives, but they saw an opportunity to end it while enhancing Trump's stature. And meanwhile, Biden seems to be completely willing to take the brunt of this. In fact, the Biden administration was willing to completely throw the election. I'm sure many of your listeners have seen this reported, but a recent poll from YouGov found that the single largest reason that the people who voted for Biden in 2020 did not vote for Kamala in 2024, the single largest reason, 29% of the respondents said that it was because of Biden's policy in Israel, the unconditional and unceasing military support to an entity that is committing a genocide. 29%. If you add back that 29%, you almost get an even popular vote. And depending on where that's distributed, that could have changed the outcome of the election. This was well known at the time. Polls during the election showed large majorities of the American public supporting a ceasefire and supporting an arms embargo against Israel and supporting a change in policy. But the Biden administration said, no, we don't care. We care more about Israel than the election. We care more about appeasing the Israel lobby, advancing this agenda of greater Israel, than we do about the domestic issues that they claim to care so much about. Things like abortion, women's rights, things like workers' protections, things like having Lena Khan at the FTC, things like having Arbuzo at the National Labor Relations Board. The Biden administration was completely willing to throw all that away because they knew they couldn't win the election with the positions they had. They didn't try to change their positions. They knew. And so they decided to trade the election, give it to Trump in exchange for supporting Israel. And who knows whether or not Kamala Harris was aware of that. I don't know what she knows. But the people around Biden certainly have to be aware of this. They have access to the same internet that we do, the same polling data, in fact, more polling data than we do. They knew certainly that the election would go to Trump maybe not certainly, but they knew that it raised the likelihood of the election going to Trump. So you have Biden on his way out being blamed in the public eye for all of what happened to Gaza. And you have Trump, new blood, the casting the image of a deal maker, being propped up as the guy who ended the war. And certainly these images are not wholly incorrect, right? I mean, if the reporting is correct, the Trump administration or the incoming Trump administration put more pressure on Israel in a single meeting than Biden had in the entire year and a half before. maybe that's correct, maybe that's not. But the fact that Israeli officials are now going to the press and saying, "Oh gosh, that guy Trump, he was such a shrewd deal maker." To me, that does not seem like uh, genuine expressions of their frustration, but it seems more like a way to seed this narrative, to enhance this narrative of Trump as a shrewd deal maker for American audiences, which, as I explained, enhances Israel's ally in America and sets the stage for further Israeli action.
And I'm wondering if that will be further Israeli aggression. We're talking with Bryce Green, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, about the Middle East, about this deal. Is it a deal? Is it no deal? What's really happening and what's next, Bryce Green? Because one can't help but wonder what will happen with the far right of Netanyahu's government, who said this cessation, I don't like it, but I'll live with it. But you don't think that the war is over. And we really can't call it a war because a war is between two standing armies, and that's what Hamas is, not a standing army. The IDF are a standing army. I mean, so the question is, I mean, what next? I mean, because can Israel continue with this level of aggression? You're making me think of South Africa before the fall of apartheid, at least in name, because there's still so many problems in South Africa, but at least by law, apartheid ended. My question for you is Israel now in the same place that South Africa was when South Africa had become her pariah state internationally? You couldn't have an Olympics there. More and more people could not do business there comfortably. I mean, it just became a place where, you didn't buy gold because it might come from South Africa. Oh, no, we can't do that. That became a thing. I mean, you're making me go back now, but I'm wondering, is that where Israel is? And does Israel know where they are and how they're regarded around the world?
Well, Israel's certainly aware of how they're regarded around the world. In fact, I'm sure you've heard, and maybe some of your listeners have, but Israel actually increased their budget for what's called Hasbara. That's propaganda, that's public diplomacy, public relations. They increased their budget for that by 20 times, a 2,000% increase. And of course, this is all funded by the United States, who pays the bills in Israel. But what that means is that Israel is spending 20 times more dollars on enhancing its public image around the world. Now, they wouldn't do that if they didn't realize that their image had been tarnished by their actions for so long, that everyone around the world equates them with, ethno supremacist genociders, with good reason. So Israel's well aware of that. Whether or not they see themselves in the position of South Africa is another question. Um, it, Unlike South Africa, the Israel lobby in the United States, it's still a potent force. In fact, the Israel lobby all around the world is still a potent force.
Mm-hmm.
South Africa wasn't as they didn't put as much energy or time or money into enhancing its public image, to funding think tanks, funding institutions, university programs. They didn't have a lobby that was straight up buying politicians the way that AIPAC does in the United States. So all these differences show that not only has America's lawless system become less and less accountable, but also a country like Israel is able to exploit that on the world stage to a greater degree. I mean, say what you will about South Africa, and there's plenty of criticism, but they never committed an overt genocide that was streamed to people's cell phones every day. They didn't have their soldiers go into South African homes by the thousand and take their underwear and post pictures on social media.
Well, that's only because we didn't have social media then.
Right.
It's like they were doing that, but we didn't see it.
Right.
Kind of that the word kind of eked out thanks to Winnie Mandela, who, had she faded into the background as she was constantly under house arrest, we never would have known about it. But because she stood so tall in that forest, which is why she was so beloved by the people. She was so vocal that she made so much noise. She made more noise than anybody. Than anybody. That is why we came to know you could about the massacres, because they would have to sneak those pictures out. I mean, this is 40, 50, 60 years ago. And you're right, because the difference I think between then and now is social media, which is why we've had several people on this show, many people on this show, to talk about TikTok. Who is it? The Jonathan Greenblatt, the head of ADL. The ADL said, "Look, you all don't understand. You keep thinking this is right and left. I'm telling you, this is a generational war we've got, because we have lost a generation. They do not like what we're doing. We have lost them, and the problem is TikTok. So we've got to seize TikTok, but now people are leaving TikTok and they're going, what is it? The red dot?
Red Note.
Red note. I'm trying to get it right because
Yeah,
I'm gonna go there too.
learn Chinese,
Like,
But
I
the
think
fact that Israel doesn't, the fact that all of this information is more available in the case of Israel than it was for South Africa, the fact that everyone can go to the internet and look at the crimes of Israel when you had to try for South Africa, that just shows how enhanced propaganda capabilities have to be for Israel to maintain its stature in America. And to me, I think that's a core difference. We don't know whether or not Israel will continue to exist as a state in 20 years. Certainly, there are a lot of Israelis who are concerned about that. Certainly, a lot of Israeli generals, a lot of Israeli commentators and analysts are concerned about how their state's going to survive. At least they were several months ago. The big change that happened in between the election and now that might change the way we view Israel's trajectory is the overthrow of Assad, right? The overthrow of the Assad government in Syria changes a lot of the geopolitical chessboard. Now Israel can use the territory of Syria to strike Iran, and a lot closer than it would be if Syria was still within this axis of resistance. HTS, the Al Qaeda offshoot that is now in charge of Syria, is pretty deferential to Israel. There was a few weeks ago where Israel was striking, I mean, they still are, but Israel was striking all of these different sites around Syria, and this journalist came and asked the HTS spokesperson whether or not they had anything to say about Israel attacking them, and they said he didn't say anything. He had nothing to say about that. And so that indicates that, of course, this government is allied with Israel. And Israel has used this moment to seize more territory, expanding from the Golan Heights area that was occupied in 1967. They're expanding that. They're expanding their footprint around the Syrian-Lebanese border in apparent preparation for future war with Hezbollah, which they currently have a ceasefire with that they're violating, of course. But this significantly enhances the Israeli hand in that region, and it might provide a much needed relief to a population that was largely on the verge of collapse, perhaps. But this is crystal ball type stuff. I can't predict the future, but if trends persist, it still looks like that American power is declining and will be less and less able to protect Israel as the years go on. And so who knows whether or not that Israel will start behaving in a normal way, or whether or not they'll continue to lash out and sow the seeds of its own destruction. It's not clear to me which path is more likely now. But in the immediate future, under Trump, in this post-ceasefire world that we seem to be inching towards, it looks like their plan will be to enhance their apartheid system of the Palestinians. And the U.S. doesn't seem to be in any sort of position or disposition to stop them. And so it falls to people like yourself and myself, people who are speaking out against these things, activists, organizers who are working hard every single day to provide a counterbalance to this pro Israel default inside of America, to this pro Israel, uh, uh, inertia, really. The more and more people who speak out about it, the less and less likely that people are to just default to supporting Israel. This past year has been a disaster for Israel's public relations. They've lost many of their former supporters. I know people who were lifelong Israel supporters who now say that this entire project is flawed in some way, that they can't get away with this genocide. Israel understands this. And so uh, uh, they might have to change their behavior. There are more and more people who are putting more pressure on the U.S. government to end their support for Israel. We don't know if that's going to be reflected electorally. You know as well as everyone else that the interests of Congress don't always align with the interests and the needs of the general public. But more and more, as Israel becomes a pariah, hopefully in the United States, that might begin to change.
We're talking with Bryce Green, Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and I want to talk about a mutual friend of ours, Sam Husseini, iconic journalist who continues to get into trouble, and he gets into good trouble, as John Lewis put it.
I love them.
I love him. They continue to put him out of these presidential press conferences. He gets into more trouble with George W. Bush and now Antony Blinken. And Max Blumenthal, of course, Secretary of State Antony Blinken had his valedictory press conference today. Of course, the Trump administration takes over on Monday, and so you're seeing all of these players in the Biden administration, they're making their goodbyes. And so we saw today in this press conference, we heard, and then saw Max Blumenthal and Sam Husseini press Antony Blinken about his record. I mean, Antony Blinken's record, I think we could say safely, it really has been abominable when it comes to the Middle East and so many other areas. He really has been he's been quite damaging, I think, to the United States. So you tell me your impressions of what happened, because they put Max Blumenthal out, but they seemingly detained Sam Husseini. When I called him, it turns out that he had not been arrested, but they did physically restrain him and hold him and they put him out. So you tell me what happened here so that people can know.
Right. Well, like you said, Blinken was giving his final press briefing as head of the State Department. Normally he had a podium occupied by Matthew Miller, who is notorious for kind of smirking through these press briefings as journalists are pressing him on facts. Blinken, during his tenure as Secretary of State, has been notorious for not being very astute of a diplomat. In fact, it's widely reported that they hardly use him for real diplomacy. When they need something done, they send the CIA chief, William Burns, who is a lot more serious, person in general. But both Sam and Blumenthal, they criticized Blinken to his face. They called him out on his lies, the lies that were coming from the podium, the denial of reports that were coming from the State Department, and they criticized him for that. And they interrupted his speech. They disrupted his speech, so clearly with the aim of bringing attention to these lies. Now, Blumenthal, from the video that I saw, he walked out without being forcibly removed before Sam Husseini was removed. But then later, Sam Husseini followed on the same lines that Blumenthal was talking about, accusing Blinken correctly of participating in and supporting a genocide, among other things. And Sam Husseini refused to get up and leave, and he stood firm. And there's video of multiple angles of I think it might have been Capitol Police. I'm not certain, but they grabbed onto him. They put their hands on him, locked his legs, and took him by the arms and legs, picked him up off the ground, and escorted him out. And to his last breath in that room, Sam Husseini was clear. He was calling out Blinken, asking him, "Why aren't you at the Hague?" And noting that both he comes from a long line of Israel lobby supporters. In fact, his father-in-law, Samuel Pizar, was a major supporter of Israel and also an associate of Jeffrey Epstein, who was a known Mossad asset. Calling attention to these things isn't liked by the press in general. The compliant press isn't liked by our compliant government that is very compliant towards Israel's needs. And one of the weird things was that watching this video of all these other journalists in the room, they were kind of smirking. They were like, "Oh, well, I don't see anything," and maybe passing it off as or blowing it off as just a curiosity. But most people in that room are, to some extent, complicit in the same crimes that Sam is calling out Blinken for.
To some extent.
To a large extent.
They're absolutely complicit. All one need do is go to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. It's an embarrassment.
Oh, right.
I said, if anyone here, I'm not a journalist. Okay, I know why I'm here. I'm a pundit. I've been invited, blah, blah, blah. But all of you other people, it's so clear that these people don't report on power. They cozy up to it. I mean, you can't get out of what kind of sense does it make that a president can't get out of office without talking to Bob Woodward? Why? I mean, why does the president have to pour their heart and soul out to him? And how is it everybody's angry with Trump about COVID? No. I'm angry with Bob Woodward, who knew about it, who saw how it perplexed then President Trump. Trump said, we don't know what this is. Because, when you get with these reporters, and particularly someone of Bob Woodward's stature, you speak to him in confidence. And so he's getting the reports, Bryce, as you recall, in real time. He said, I don't know what this is. And as a leader, you don't want to shout fire in a crowded building. You have to get the information, interpret it, and you have to figure out, how can I say this to the public without frightening them? Because frightened people do desperate and bad things. So I don't even know what to do. He sat on that information for almost a year until he released his book, 8 or 9 months later. How irresponsible is that, Bryce?
They have agendas. And Woodward himself is actually very interesting. I mentioned him earlier in the in the segment, but Woodward's history. I'm working on a series of articles that's reviewing his most recent book, War, about the Biden administration's handling of Ukraine and Gaza. And in the epilogue of that book, Woodward's clear about what he wants people to believe. He wants people to believe that Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, and the whole national security team brought I think he calls it a, quote, fundamental decency to the office in their effort to avert wars. But this is all nonsense. Woodward has been a goon for the deep political system of America for quite some time. An interesting story that I hope to illuminate here is how exactly he ended up at the Washington Post office to collect the stories about Richard Nixon. How exactly he developed this relationship with the source known as Deep Throat, and how exactly the narrative that was presented in the famous book turned movie, All the President's Men, completely distorts reality. And that Woodward was actually one of the subordinates of someone who was instrumental in Nixon's downfall, a man named Alexander Haig. And for his service in shaping this narrative of Congress fighting corruption and getting rid of Tricky Dick Nixon, in exchange for solidifying that narrative, he's essentially been made the court reporter, a court historian, a court chronicler, who's telling the story of the state in a way that flatters or doesn't flatter the people who are decided to be made friends or enemies of the state. His books after, I think he's written a book about every single president since Reagan, actually. He did a book about Reagan, did a book about Bush, Clinton, a few about Clinton, a few about Bush, a few about Obama,
Mhm. There's a
several about
seminal.
Trump.
There's
Yeah,
a seminal books about these presidents. That's what's so stunning. A president cannot get out of office without speaking to him and sharing their inner thoughts. It's
right.
kind of interesting to me.
It's bizarre. I mean, what does that say about our system of journalism? That this is how the presidency is handled. What does that say about the electoral role in selecting who's going to run their country? If
Yeah.
the president has to submit to someone like this, and the president is completely aware of all of these other powers that are constraining their behavior, then what is the role of people doing elections? What is the role of people showing up to vote? If the president is just going to be constrained by 8 guys in a room who no one elected, but who have $1 billion and the intelligence community at their disposal. And in fact, this narrative about Trump versus the deep state, you shouldn't take it too seriously, right? Trump himself is a member of the global criminal underworld. He is certainly himself a criminal, and he certainly has connections to the heights of American oligarchy from which the deep state, such as it is, exists. But the deep political establishment in America isn't a monolith, and throughout his presidency, you could see various elements of this deep state acting against Trump from within his administration. The entire Russiagate narrative, which was driven by intelligence community and their assets in the American media, that was a disaster for Trump. And in fact, it derailed a lot of his more positive international affairs instincts. Trump came in wanting to make some sort of rapprochement with Russia, saying that it doesn't make sense to have this powerful country to be our enemy. Well, the Russiagate saga made it so that every overture that Donald Trump made to Putin was portrayed as proof that Putin stole the election on behalf of Trump. And so it did manifest. And in fact, Trump took harder lines against Russia than Obama did in some cases, being the first president to send weapons to Ukraine. But that's just one example of these elements of our political system acting against Trump. And again, none of this is to say that Trump is good or that he's a savior or that he cares about people like you and me. He doesn't. Surprise. But at least when a character like Trump, who isn't as steeped in the Washington, the Atlanticist, the international empire ideology, when someone like that tries to change things, well, then there's an apparatus, an institutional inertia against him doing that. What does that say about our government? What does that say about our elections? What does that say about our democracy?
What
Now,
does it?
well, it's a farce that the democracy that we have, the public state, sits on top of deeper and more complex realities of power. Every empire in the world, every country in the world, operates usually on a top-down principle. America's somewhat unique, and the Western world is somewhat unique in saying that there is no top-down. You, the people, have a say in our government. There is no oligarchy. There is no deep state. There is no secret anti-democratic forces that affect things. Everything that happens in America is because you, the people, want it. It's nonsense, but a lot of people believe it, and a lot of people's careers depend on at least pretending to believe it. And that's the system that we are inheriting. And so in Trump's second term, who knows whether or not he will even have positive instincts on this. We've seen a change again on the Ukraine front, where the Biden administration has been full-throated support of this proxy war in Ukraine that's decimating the country, that's destroying an entire generation of men. Earlier, I think you had me on to talk about how the Biden administration was trying to get 18-year-olds in Ukraine to be drafted, to lower the draft age from 25 to 18 or 26 to 18. Zelensky has been hesitant to do this because he says that a lot of these guys haven't had a chance to have babies yet. And if we send them off to die, that might completely demographically destroy Ukraine. The Biden administration said, we don't care. We want you to send these teenagers to go and die. Now, Trump has been going for an end to the Ukraine war during the campaign trail, which I believe was one of the only significant differences between him and Harris, especially as foreign policy goes. But lately, Trump has shifted his tone. His ambassador, a guy named Kellogg, or the chief Ukraine guy, a guy named Kellogg, has now called for the same thing Biden was calling for, has now called for lowering the draft age to 18, again, calling for Ukrainian teenagers to die. That's certainly a change of tone from the Trump administration. But still, we'll see. Both Trump and some of the people that he's picked have said that they are hoping for a peace deal in Ukraine. The fact that they're saying a peace deal in Ukraine is their goal is a dramatic turn from what the Biden administration has said for years, which is that we won't negotiate with Russia, no peace for Ukraine without Ukraine. And of course, I'm sure as you and your listeners know, the Biden administration spent a lot of time and energy actively derailing peace efforts in Ukraine so that the war would continue. So if Trump and his people are serious about perhaps coming to an agreement, perhaps going to the negotiation table, that's certainly a positive development. But I think it was Marco Rubio who said in his confirmation hearing that that's expected to take a few months at best. And in Washington, I'm sure you've seen how a few months can become a few more months, can become a few weeks, or a few years can become eternal. So only time will tell how this crisis, the Ukraine crisis, will resolve.
Well, and of course, there are reports that uh, when President Trump was when he had papers drawn up to end like NAFTA and other measures, that his staff were physically restrained from coming into his office. It was like a real Game of Thrones, Hunger Games in that place, which I think would explain some of his cabinet choices because he has chosen, in some instances, outliers. And so we'll see. We'll see. That's why I'm saying I kind of have to step back and see what all of this is because I don't know. I mean, as America is having to figure out where it is in the world order because the world is shifting. Bryce Green, America is no longer a unipolar world where it's America and everybody else. No, it's changed. I have a couple more minutes and I want you to kind of help us to look at what we should look for after Monday because everyone, a lot of people have a lot of trepidation and a lot of unease about the Trump administration. I said, well, you should feel unease and trepidation about every last one of them because
Right.
you get the same thing from administration to administration. And that's what I've seen. Bryce Green, the last couple of minutes belong to you.
All right. Well, what should you be worried about? I mean, there's so much to be worried about.
Or just
I mean,
even worried about, looking for,
looking for.
vigilant,
I think we should be vigilant because there will be a lot of people who will be trying to solidify this narrative of Trump and the Republicans as the genuine party of the working class, the genuine anti-imperialist, the genuine critics of this American-led world order. But that's not the case. Despite, again, these instincts, these tendencies from the Trump administration, from people, like Tulsi Gabbard or Trump himself, despite these tendencies to critique power, these people have shown themselves time and time again to be nothing but loyal servants to power. And all of this fanfare for some of the international stuff will do a lot to hide what is almost certainly going to happen on the domestic front. For example, the Republicans are loudly planning to go after, women's rights inside of the country. They're loudly planning to go after unions. They're loudly planning to give tax cuts to crypto billionaires and to the oligarchs who control big tech. In fact, this big tech space is another place where we should be looking at. Since 2014, till I think reaching its high point in 2020, up until now, we've been in an era of what some people have called the awakening, where a lot of these liberal policies, a lot of these more liberal understandings, these cultural issues have been brought to the forefront with a lot of positive effects. Not all positive, but largely it's more humane and more accepting. But that seems to be coming to an end now. Mark Zuckerberg is threatening, who was largely a Democrat, democratically aligned figure when it was popular. He's made an about face. He's looking more and sounding a lot more like Elon Musk. He's got the gold chain now. This isn't a hoodie Mark Zuckerberg anymore, and he's announced an end to a lot of these liberal policies inside of Facebook. Well, this will have an effect beyond just like the workers inside of Facebook and the everyday user and how they're going to engage with Facebook. It signals a shift in how the global oligarchy is aligning, how the American oligarchy is aligning under Trump. They seem to believe that their lot is with this far right international that's growing around the world. And while liberals in America certainly have offered nothing to combat that, and to the extent that they haven't, they are very responsible for what Trump is bringing in. But they have nothing to offer in exchange of that. There is no the Kamala campaign, which was, I think, the last gasp of this kind of American liberalism. It had nothing to offer the average worker. It had nothing to offer in terms of reorienting the levers of the state to better work for the working class. And no, I mean, they thought you were so stupid that you would start drooling after they brought out Beyonce, or after they paid $1 million to Al Sharpton or whoever.
Half a million to his
excuse me,
right.
$500,000. I'm sorry. But I mean, that's what the Kamala campaign had to offer. And if that was the last gasp of this kind of American liberalism, well, then it's essentially the nail in the coffin. And so we're going to see a lot more pandering by America's oligarchs to the far right tendencies of the American public, of the American elite class. And we're going to see a departure from, the DEI is often used as a pejorative, rightly so in some cases, but certainly there's nothing wrong with diversity, equity, and inclusion, such as it is. We might see an end to these programs being utilized in colleges, where we might see an end to them being an orientation of a lot of the political establishment. And we're also planning on seeing a clampdown on the public sector in America. This Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, it seems to be little more than a tool to continue the policies of neoliberalism, of Reagan, of Thatcher, to gut public services in exchange for having for-profit services that will enrich, again, the oligarchs, the billionaires. And, we're seeing it right now in my own state. They're trying to dismantle the public school system in Indianapolis. They're trying to dismantle the tenure system at public universities in Indiana, including the university I attend. They're trying to clamp down on professors expressing their political opinions in any capacity. They're trying to give the state the tools to clamp down on speech that challenges them. Now, free speech can often be used as a disingenuous excuse to say horrible things. But I think one of the unique things about America is that we do preserve those rights within our Constitution. And right now, the Trump administration and Republican legislatures all around the country are cracking down on that, especially at university campuses, in no small part because of the pro-Palestine protests that happened over the summer and that have been ongoing, that I've been a part of, but also because of other things. These anti-empire ideologies have space to grow in a university. Young people are being exposed to more and more critiques of their current system. Well, the state doesn't want that to happen. And so we have attacks on unions. We have attacks on the everyday worker. We have gifts to billionaires. We have gifts to the military industrial complex. all of this is what I expect to happen under Trump. And whether or not we're able to replace Trump with someone or something better, I mean, well, I have limited hope for our political system. But if there is going to be anything that happens, it'll be because people with clear eyes and clear hearts are able to come together and do the organizing that's necessary, do the organizing that the situation demands.
Bryce Green, the brilliant Bryce Green, fairness and accuracy reporting. Oh my goodness. Well, we've got a lot to look forward to, a lot of work to do, everybody. Do not despair. It is in times like these that we can do some of our best work. That's right, we can. And I expect to get some of the best work from you. Bryce Green, very quickly before we go, how can we see more of your work, more of your writings, and how can we stay in touch with you on social media?
You can follow me on Twitter. I'm just Bryce Green at Twitter. My handle is at the Green BJ. My name. I'm also on Substack. Bryce Green's newsletter is the name of it. Maybe I'll find a new name for it. But if you just Google Bryce Green Substack, it should be there. And I also just created an account on Red Note, which may be banned alongside TikTok if that law is to go into effect. Just given the fact that it has so many new accounts. But I'm there. I'm checking it out. So check me out there.
All right, Bryce Green, everybody. I'm Santita Jackson. Whew. Let's get ready, everybody, and go to work. May God bless you. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota, Santita Jackson Show.